and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I am your host, Catherine Hadro, in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us. In this week's show, a house of horrors. How did the recent baby remains discovery at an Indiana abortionist's home compare to that of late-term abortionist Kermit Gosnell? Planned Parenthood reveals their influence over Hollywood. We speak out, and this.
We finally did a deep dive into what does it mean to be a Christian and what does it mean to be faithful even when the cross feels completely and totally unbearable.
With the unexpected ups and downs of life, one Catholic mother opens up about how you can never plan your parenthood. But first, our top story, we have pro-life analysis of bold pro-life statements the Trump administration declared at the recent United Nations General Assembly.
We in America believe that every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God.
That was President Donald Trump addressing the 74th United Nations General Assembly last week. He defended the right of countries to establish protections for unborn human life. His comments followed a high-level meeting on universal health coverage at the UN, at which both Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin and U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar insisted on the protection of unborn life as part of a global commitment to health care. Here is Secretary Azar.
We do not support references to ambiguous terms and expressions, such as sexual and reproductive health and rights in UN documents, because they can undermine the critical role of the family and promote practices like abortion in circumstances that do not enjoy international consensus and which can be misinterpreted by UN agencies. There is no international right to an abortion, and these terms should not be used to promote pro-abortion policies and measures.
Joining us now in our D.C. studio for analysis is Mallory Quigley, the Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List, and Scott Lloyd, the former Director of the Office of Refugee Resettlement at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He's also previously worked for the Knights of Columbus. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. First off, what's your reaction to these bold pro-life statements made at the United Nations? What's their significance?
I think both were, once again, stand-up and cheer moments coming out of this administration. And the president's comments in particular, they were part of a broader speech that I think every American should watch in its entirety. But his comments about the sacredness of human life really grounded everything else that he said about standing up to bullies around the world in the conviction that we're all gifts from God. And I think that if that doesn't inform your work as a servant of the people, then you really don't belong in government.
Mallory, what's your reaction?
Yeah, one of just immense gratitude for the president and his administration that they want to protect life, not just here at home, but do what they can to promote life and respect for life internationally. And Scott mentioned, standing up to bullies. A lot of the people at the UN are nations who are our allies on many other issues, but when it comes to life, there's this area of disagreement. So I think it's really important to see the president standing up in this bold way.
Scott, Secretary Azar was your former boss. What can you tell us about his pro-life leadership?
He's an excellent pro-life leader, just one of the top attorneys in the nation, and somebody who he's got a difficult job in standing up to a lot of the antics. Sometimes we were standing together in opposition to some of those antics. But he's the right man for that job, absolutely.
Mallory, there were some media reports hinting to a leaked letter from Secretary Azar and Secretary Pompeo that were sent to nations in the United Nations. But hadn't we known of this letter already?
That's right. I mean, we've known about this weeks ago, and I think even Pro-Life Weekly activists and viewers had already thanked Secretaries Pompeo and Azar for this pro-life action. And Secretary Azar earlier at the top of the segment talking about the ambiguous language that pro-abortion advocates are seeking to have inserted into these official UN documents. And what that really does is undermine pro-life nations who have already asserted a right to life of the unborn, protection for women and children, and the U.S. is coming alongside and backing our other pro-life allies internationally and saying, we're not going to have the UN be interfering and asserting an alleged right to abortion. So yes, I think that was maybe pro-abortion advocates in the media who were trying to make this look reflect poorly on the administration, but we knew about this all along.
And Scott, to that point, we heard Secretary Azar say there is no such thing as an international right to abortion. And that really goes to the heart of the issue that you had to battle during your time at HHS. Can you speak to that?
Sure. As Director of Office of Refugee Resettlement, we cared for unaccompanied minors who were in a network of shelters. And very soon after coming into the position, we encountered requests for pregnancy terminations. And what we did was go back to the laws, the policies that guided our handling of those circumstances, and came up with essentially our gloss on that policy. And the determination we made was that there was nothing that obligated us to assist a girl while she was in our custody in obtaining an abortion. And the general approach was to treat both the child and the mother as people in our care that we were tasked with caring for.
Right, absolutely. You know, Mallory, speaking about a pro-life international agenda, the Trump administration has expanded the Mexico City policy really to a new level. How does this compare to previous administrations?
Oh, well, I mean, without question, this is the most pro-life administration we've ever seen. On day one of his presidency, of course, Donald Trump reinstating and expanding the Mexico City policy to include more taxpayer funding going to international abortions, saying that American taxpayers are not going to be complicit through their money with the promotion and performing of abortions overseas. And now, just recently, Secretary Pompeo going even further and saying that that's going to apply to international organizations that even indirectly might promote or perform abortions. So this is really just another huge pro-life win for our movement, and another reason, you know, we hope to see this administration continue for another 4 years.
It really does make a difference to have a pro-life international policy like that.
Absolutely. We are, through our monetary policy, we are respecting the will of countries that have pro-life laws and not imposing the radical abortion lobby's agenda overseas. So it's really important.
Scott, during your time at HHS, it really seemed like there was a target on your back. The abortion lobby was frequently calling for you by name to be fired. And we actually have an example of that. Here's a clip of a video put out by Planned Parenthood Action. Take a look. What can you tell us, Scott, about being on the receiving end of Planned Parenthood's bullying?
In one sense, a lot of it just blew by because you're so busy that you're not paying attention to a lot of that. A lot of it is easy to dismiss as just further antics by that crowd. In some ways, you know, it's surprising. It's surprising to be at work and discover that there's a truck driving around and it's a billboard truck calling for you to be fired. But at the same time, this is of a piece with the antics that you see out of that crowd. And as some people said, you know, don't worry, this is a badge of honor for you. And in some ways, you know, it's the right type of opposition coming from the right people, in our view.
And hopefully life's a little bit more peaceful and calm now. You're in the private sector. You've written a new book.
Yeah. The book is something that I began actually before law school. It's one that continued through law school. I actually put law school on pause to finish it. But I also, it was finished before coming on to the government, but just the timing worked out that it got published afterwards. So it's a novel entitled The Undergraduate, something I'm very proud of.
Excellent. And finally, Mallory, I did want to get your take on another bit of news coming out of HHS this week. HHS announced they are redistributing the millions of dollars that Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers gave up because of the Protect Life rule. What should we know?
Yes, well, of course, Planned Parenthood and other pro-abortion advocates that were receiving Title X funding voluntarily giving up this money. It totals to about $33.6 million is what I believe I saw. And so HHS is making that money available to other Title X recipients who were already in compliance with the rule or have complied since its implementation, to say that, yes, we will separate abortion from our business and from our healthcare services for women. And I think it's a really great use of the money that the administration is trying to maintain some consistency for women and families who were using the Title X program to access certain kinds of healthcare. So it's really a women and family first mentality.
Mallory Quigley and Scott Lloyd, thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Catherine.
The Trump administration made a bold pro-life declaration at the United Nations General Assembly last week. President Donald Trump told the member nations gathered at the General Assembly that every child, born and unborn, is a gift from God, while U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar said there is no international right to an abortion. This courageous pro-life stance sets an example for the rest of the world, and that brings us to this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to thank the Trump administration for urging UN countries to protect the unborn and defend human dignity. Once you get to this website, just type in your basic information so we can send your message straight to the administration. Again, the Trump administration made the United States' commitment to human life, born and unborn, clear at the United Nations General Assembly. The world knows that the U.S. stands with the littlest Americans and the unborn across the globe. Send your thank you message to the administration for this bold pro-life statement by going to ProLifeWeekly.com. Turning now to our next story, following the gruesome discovery of over 2,000 preserved baby remains at an abortionist's home, many are asking how such a horrific thing could happen. But the case is not unique. Late-term abortionist Ulrich Klopfer died last month. His family then contacted the coroner's office about possible baby remains at his Illinois home and to request proper removal. Upon arrival to the property, authorities discovered 2,246 preserved baby remains. Some have drawn comparisons to this discovery to the notorious late-term Philadelphia abortionist Kermit Gosnell, who also kept preserved baby remains. Gosnell was convicted in 2013 of killing 3 infants born alive after botched abortions, as well as the involuntary manslaughter of an adult patient and for performing abortions beyond Pennsylvania's 24-week limit. Joining us now is someone who became an expert on the Kermit Gosnell case, Anne McElhinney. Anne was a producer of the film Gosnell, the Trial of America's Biggest Serial Killer. She also co-wrote the book Gosnell, the Untold Story of America's Most Prolific Serial Killer. Anne, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much, Catherine.
Absolutely. And first off, what was your initial reaction when you saw the news about the baby remains on Klopfer's property?
Well, I mean, as you can imagine, the first thing I thought about was Gosnell. It's bizarre, actually. The similarities, the fact, and what immediately struck out to me was that they were medically preserved, that he had gone to quite a bit of trouble, that in fact, lots of thoughts came to my mind. Obviously, I thought of the feet, the remains of the children that were kept in jars that Gosnell had done. So I was immediately struck by the fact that he medically preserved them. And, the question, obviously, loads of questions emerge about how, there's so many questions, like this is his home. So he's living, he has a wife. How did this happen? And obviously subsequent stories have emerged that these remains date from 2 decades ago. How any of this is possible? What happened to these children? Where did they come from? Who are the mothers? Who are the fathers? It's an extraordinary story. And of course, obviously very, very reminiscent of what happened with Kermit Gosnell. It's extraordinary.
You're right. We're just beginning to see the investigation into this. There are more questions than answers at this point. Are there other similarities or differences between Klopfer and Gosnell that you've noticed already?
Well, I think it appears that he also was under scrutiny from the authorities occasionally. and that he had flaunted many rules, that are already in place, but again had been successful in continuing on despite them. So, what I think is important that comes out of this story is, again, the fact that, this idea when Gosnell first emerged, and people like yourself who highlighted that story, and obviously very few people in the mainstream media who highlighted the question emerged, like first of all, how did he get away with it for so long? But the bigger question right now is the question of oversight. How was it when there were questions about this guy, when there were questions about Kermit Gosnell, repeated questions, and the death, obviously, of two women, Samika Shaw and Carnamaya Monger, that no one in the Department of Health in Pennsylvania decided to investigate? Similarly, with this case, we see a very, very similar thing where many questions were asked about this guy who was the biggest abortion provider in the state of Indiana, and yet he kept operating. He kept operating with impunity for forever. The secondary question here is how the media have covered this story since it emerged. And the answer is, of course, like very, very similar to Gosnell, they haven't. There's an incredible incuriosity among journalists when it comes to stories like this, which highlight abortion, by the way. The real problem with covering this story properly and doing it the job that journalists should do is that it really highlights the humanity of the children. And no one wants that. That's the last thing you want. If you're if you're someone who supports the abortion industry or someone who is profiting from the abortion industry, the last thing you want to do is to bring attention to the humanity of the children. In the case of Gosnell, 47 children's remains were found on the clinic. And by the way, of those 47, only I think it was 2 or 3 could be deemed to have been killed illegally. So and I've seen all the bodies, and what is striking is the idea that those children were, disposed of legally, that they were legally dispatched from this world through a process called abortion. This is, the value of stories like this. The value of stories like this is highlighting the humanity of the children, and I just wish the media would pay attention.
And you are such an expert on Gosnell, and I know you've interviewed him a number of times in prison. Did you get any insight into how someone becomes so hardened that they are committing such heinous acts?
My experience now with the abortion industry and interviewing quite a number of people involved is there's a lot of greed involved. And then there's the God complex, which I think is very true in Kermit Gosnell's case, where he loved the control he had over these very poor and vulnerable communities and people that he came across. And he loved that control. And I think for somebody, with psychopathic tendencies, as Gosnell obviously has, this is the perfect place for you. And who is this guy? Here we have, I love that thing where, I've heard this so often about Gosnell. He's an outlier. Well, these stories seem to be piling up. You cover them all the time on EWTN, which as one network that covers these stories properly. This is not an isolated. Gosnell was not isolated even from the get-go. And since him, these stories are mounting up all the time. When eventually will people start to say, no, actually, these aren't outliers. This is actually very telling of the industry that's out there, an unregulated industry, an industry that doesn't, have to, subscribe to any of the rules that any other medical facilities subscribe to, because they get away, basically, literally, with murder in a very supportive environment.
And it will not leave our news cycle. Anne McElhinney, producer of Gosnell, the trial of America's biggest serial killer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Catherine.
When we come back.
No, we did not plan this. This was not in the color-coded plan that I had given God about our lives.
Catholic mother and author Kathryn Whitaker opens up about the countercultural truth that you can't always plan parenthood. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I am your host, Catherine Hadro. Planned Parenthood has advised screenwriters on more than 150 movies and television shows. That is this week's Speak Out segment. Planned Parenthood's Director of Arts and Entertainment Engagement, yes, that is an actual job, recently told the Washington Post magazine she has advised on more than 150 movies and TV shows, including the pro-abortion film Obvious Child, to programs like Shrill and Jane the Virgin. She said it is her job to, quote, correct with facts. The Washington Post magazine profile said the abortion giant employee, quote, does attempt to ensure that if a script features a Planned Parenthood clinic specifically, the organization isn't put in an unflattering light. Planned Parenthood knows it is losing important political battles, so it is turning to the culture. In the same profile piece, Live Action's Lila Rose pointed out that allowing Planned Parenthood to fact-check abortion scripts would be like allowing tobacco companies to review scripts about smoking. I couldn't agree more. Hollywood is allowing the nation's largest abortion provider to create its own narrative and storytelling. That's not art. That is propaganda. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to thank the Trump administration for urging UN countries to protect the unborn and defend human dignity. Being open to life also means being open to the potential surprises and ups and downs and sufferings that can come with it. In our pro-life focus segment this week, we sit down with Catholic author and mother of 6, Kathryn Whitaker. Whitaker has just released a new book, Live Big, Love Bigger, in which she recounts how God shook up her type A orderly life with the birth of her premature son. We discuss big families, the lessons learned from her son's time in the hospital, and how you can't always plan your parenthood. Here's our interview.
Kathryn Whitaker, thanks for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's a joy. You describe yourself as a type A, hyper-organized kind of woman, but then life threw you a curveball, something you couldn't control with your 5th pregnancy. Can you speak to us and share with us about your son Luke's birth?
Yes. So Luke was born at 36 weeks, so what people would consider a late-term preemie. And we thought that he just had a wonky kidney. And then he was born, and it was an emergency C-section, so wasn't prepared for that. And then on day 9, Luke got necrotizing enterocolitis, so basically an intestinal illness that ate away at his bowels. So he coded and stopped breathing, and we had to resuscitate him, and that began our whole new life in the NICU and our whole new life as a family.
At one point in your book, you write, I cried more in that first year after Luke's birth than the previous 13 years of our marriage combined. Emotional, completely sleep-deprived, and stressed, I felt as if no one understood the fear I carried. Kathryn, what kind of impact did having a premature baby have on your marriage?
It was like a wrecking ball. I mean, we had a beautiful marriage. We were faithful. We were going to church. We were doing all the things. I don't think you can prepare yourself for something like that. And it was a massive disconnect because I was hypersensitive to everything that was going on with Luke in the hospital. Scott was trying to keep things humming at home. And it was such a massive hit to the heart and to the soul and to the faith in all the ways. And our kids at home were suffering because we were kind of part-time parents trying to do both in the NICU and them. And it was brutal. It was the hardest thing I've ever done.
But you did seek help.
Yes. So we went to counseling about 7 months after Luke was born. I had a good friend come to the hospital. Luke was back in the hospital for another surgery. And she said, Kathryn, maybe you should go get some help. And she's a mama who knows. They have 3 special needs children. And when Scott came to the hospital that night, I said, I think maybe we need to go get some help. And he said, I think you're right. And it really was at the encouragement of his former boss, Bishop Amond, who's now the Archbishop in New Orleans. That was a big thing that he encouraged his employees to do, to seek help, and seek counseling. He would do it once a year. And I think had it not been for his influence, I'm not sure that we would have seen it as an option.
Because even though that's going on with your child, you need to be paying attention to your marriage.
Yes.
And strengthening your marriage.
Yes.
Kathryn, because you were open to life, you were open then to the suffering that came with that. And the suffering that comes with having a premature baby. What has that experience and motherhood taught you about God?
Well, we finally got real with each other. I mean, I'm Southern, Texan, so very polite, and we had this little no sir, yes sir relationship. And then Luke rolls into our life, and things finally got real. I finally developed a relationship with Christ that was authentic and real, and we finally did a deep dive into what does it really mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to live this countercultural life? And what does it mean to love when the cross feels completely and totally unbearable?
I think your witness, Kathryn, just so juxtaposes this message that the culture tells us that we can be just perfectly in control of everything, and it's the lie the abortion industry tells us. I mean, look at the name Planned Parenthood, but you can't really plan your parenthood, can you?
No, we did not plan this. This was not in the color-coded plan that I had given God about our lives. I think with Luke, I finally just sunk into the fact that it's okay to not be in control, because all the details that I was worrying about ultimately didn't affect the end game, that God was in control of the long game. And we finally just had a real relationship, a real life with him. And I mean, it's been harder, but it's also been a lot more sanctifying and a lot more beautiful. And I'm grateful that that's a witness that my kids have been able to see, and that Luke is he's transformed tons of people, not just in our own family. It's been beautiful.
That is beautiful. And Kathryn, you are a convert to Catholicism. And some of the church's hardest teachings are her teachings on life and her teachings against contraception. So I'm curious, as a convert to Catholicism through this journey in motherhood and marriage, how did you grapple with that?
I really struggled. And as a matter of fact, the life issues for me were, even though I was a Protestant, grew up appreciating life, contraception and the death penalty were two things. I'm from Texas, so those were two ingrained things that I had a really hard time accepting. And there's a whole big, beautiful story about how we eventually came to accept that teaching of the church when it came to artificial contraception. But I don't know, I think when you face and you're kneeling at the bedside of your baby who you don't know if it's going to make it through the night, I think that puts a lot of things into laser focus. And we saw the sanctity of life all around that NICU. You couldn't get away from it. And each one of those lives were dignified and beautiful, and we willingly went into that, and I think it transformed how we felt and how I want to meet people where they are who are struggling with the same thing, because I get it, it's hard. The church is asking hard things of us.
You are very open about the fact that being a mom of 6, sometimes life can be chaotic.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So what do you want to say to a viewer who's watching that might intimidate them? Being open to life and being open to that chaos that might ensue. What kind of word do you want to share with them?
Be present. So don't try to be the mom that you're going to be 10 years from now. Like, how am I going to handle 10 kids, or how am I going to handle 4 kids when I just have one? Like, you're not there yet. We learned a lot of things along the way. And so the Kathryn of 18 years ago who just had 1 baby is very different than the Kathryn now who has 6. And I think it was just the grace of being present and saying we're going to enjoy the season, even the hard parts, because there's a lot of hard parts when you have a lot of little babies, and then know that God is going to give us what we need when we get to the next season. And he certainly showed us that with Luke, but just don't try to live in a life that you're not there yet. Just, focus where you are and be present and love your people. You'll figure it out.
Some wise words. Kathryn Whitaker, thank you so much for taking time to be with us.
Thanks, Kathryn. I appreciate it.
That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, be sure to reach us at ProLifeWeekly@EWTN.com or connect with us on social media. Just search for EWTN Pro-Life on all the major platforms. And remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.